Our next question today comes from a comment on our YouTube channel. We've had a request from a viewer, and they write, "Please, can you read any newspaper so that we know how to read properly?" And I like this question for many, many reasons. There is, uh, first of all, the recognition that reading is not merely a silent act. Many of us are accustomed to reading things silently, especially later on in our schooling, and that's fine because sometimes there are places in which we'd like to read in silence. But there is an even more primal and foundational experience, which is the experience of reading out loud and hearing writing read out loud. This takes us back to the realm of stories that we might have been told as a child, for instance, by parents or by a librarian in a public library or by a grandmother or any other person that is important to us in our lives. And I think that there's something really wonderful and nourishing about the experience both of being read to out loud and reading out loud. And of course, for someone who wants to uh, increase their capacity with a language, reading a newspaper is a wonderful way to increase one's vocabulary, for instance, as well as to keep up on current events. So I thought to honor this request, I will read just a little bit from a newspaper, just to give a taste for how I would read a newspaper. And then I want to share three other tips that you may or may not be expecting. So here's just a couple paragraphs from a newspaper. This is an article with the title, "An Island Chef Brings Magic and Comfort Through Food and Music." And here's the first two paragraphs of that newspaper article. When Chantel Jackson was in elementary school, she began to watch the school chef who worked at her Tacoma, Washington boarding school. She was captivated by the magic of cooking and the smells that came from the kitchen. Jackson's observations of Corey Stoneyham, the school chef, led to the school creating a position for Jackson in the kitchen that allowed her to do some simple tasks. This time in the kitchen, said Jackson, started her love for cooking. So there is a taste of reading a newspaper out loud. And something that we can learn from reading a newspaper out loud is how the first two paragraphs of a newspaper article are specifically designed to not only announce what that newspaper article is about, but also to get us interested. And in this case, the author of this newspaper article has done so by telling us a story, by painting a picture of this person who saw a chef in the school cafeteria and became intrigued by food, by the smells of food, by the art of cooking food, creating food, and wanted to become involved with that. And then we can imagine that if we went on to read the story, we would also discover how this played out in this person's life. Where are they now working? How might they also be inspiring students themselves? Now, here are three more tips I wanted to share with you. One is that, along with reading newspapers out loud, you might also read stories out loud. This is because reading a story will bring you into different kinds of sentence structures. It will bring you into different kinds of vocabulary. It will even bring you into different kinds of rhythms as you read out loud. So I thought I would also read a little bit of a story, in this case a folk tale, as retold by the Canadian storyteller Alice Cain in a book of hers called The Dreamer Awakes. And this is from a story called Ivan Tortik. And again, I'll just read the first paragraph. And you'll see that with a story like this, the job of the first paragraph is quite similar to get us interested, to announce the theme of the story. But unlike a newspaper article, a story may take more poetic liberty in doing so. It might evoke a world more fully, with touching on our senses more deeply, for instance. Let's see how this story goes. Here's the beginning of Ivan Tortik. He was born on the coast of Brittany, where God's sea is vast, but the fish are small. And when his mother took him to the church to be christened, she tied a piece of black bread around his neck to show, she said, that he'd always be poor and he'd always be ugly. But she was wrong, as we shall see. That to me is a wonderful first paragraph of a story, which really invites us into an entire world, a mother and child, the expectation of poverty, and the hint that things for this particular character might turn out differently. My second tip for you is that along with newspapers and stories, you might even dare to read some poetry out loud. Because of all the different genres, poetry is the one that I think offers us the most in being read out loud. Sometimes a poem won't make sense to us reading it silently on the page, but when we hear it out loud, we hear it in our own ears, then the poem may come to life, and we may hear not just the ideas or the pictures that the poem is presenting us with, but also something of the music of language itself. So I thought I'd share a poem from a book of poems that I myself wrote called The Safety of Edges. And this is just a short poem called Cascadian Lyric. Cascadia is one of the terms people use for the bioregion that includes Marie's beach cottage as well as my cozy writing yurt. It's a rainy part of the world, a very green and lush part of the world much of the time. And so this is a poem about that experience of rain as well as sunshine. It's called Cascadian Lyric. After 4 days of rain, the light falls on green leaves. Salal, glowing brightly, almost from within, then fading with the sky, clouds moving in the leaves. Not two things or one, but one moment unfolding, rain and sunlight and leaves within it, everything within it, without end. So that's a little taste of poetry being read out loud. And I promised you 3 tips. So here's my third tip. We are lucky to be living in a time when audiobooks are not only being read all over the world, but are also readily available. So one more way to learn how to read out loud is to listen to people who have really mastered the art of reading out loud, of giving life to a story, whether it's a fictional story or whether it's a nonfiction work, something about an actual person or the experience of an actual person or actual people. And so one more thing I would encourage you to do if you're interested in the art of reading out loud is to find a book that intrigues you, that you are personally interested in, and find an audiobook recording of that book and listen to how that book is read by an actor or by a speaker. You might even have the book in front of you so you can read the writing as you hear the writing. And that, I think, will become a great teacher to you. I hope that all of this goes well. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask them in an email or in a follow-up comment. And so those are my thoughts on reading out loud. Let me just check in with the chat here. There's a lovely note here from Sylvia E., who I believe is writing in from Canada. Sylvia E. says, our homeschooling group gets together every week to give the students a chance to read out loud to the group. That's really wonderful. It's become a cherished activity for all of us and helped tremendously with reading comprehension, public speaking, and confidence in general. The students even share their original stories and poems and cheer each other on. Reading out loud has become so important to my children's development. Well, that's really wonderful, Sylvia. I'm thrilled to hear that. I think that's one of the wonderful things we can do, particularly if we're homeschooling maybe with another family or we have siblings, we have other children that we're homeschooling. That can be a great way to bring an activity like reading into a communal environment, a way that we get to celebrate together the power and magic of words out loud. Sylvia also writes, what a lovely poem. Thank you, Sylvia. Thomas, is your book of poetry available for purchase? That a wonderful question. You can, it is. There's a link to it on the Cozy Grammar website. You can learn more about it in the About section under Thomas, under my name. So you can learn more about it there.